All right, let's dive into the world of startups. Today, we're tackling The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And we're going to break down how to build a successful business, even, when you're facing tons of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how the lean startup takes these principles from lean manufacturing and applies them to the unpredictable world of startups.
Yeah, for sure. I always think about startups as these kind of scrappy ventures, but Eric Ries actually has a really specific definition in the book. What is it?
Well, he defines a startup as a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And what's interesting is that this definition can apply to any new venture that faces uncertainty, even within a large company.
Oh, okay. So even a project, within a company like, say, Intuit, the maker of TurboTax,
Right.
that could be considered a startup if it's tackling something brand new. Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, Intuit is a great example of a company that has used lean startup principles to really speed up their innovation. They went from taking 5.5 years to generate $50 million in revenue from a new product to doing the same in just 1 year.
Whoa. Okay, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So how do they make such a dramatic change? What's the secret sauce?
Well, one of the core principles of the lean startup is validated learning. You see, startups exist to learn how to build a sustainable business. And this learning has to be tested and validated through experiments and customer feedback.
Yeah, that makes me think about all those times that I've poured my heart into a project only to realize later, like, nobody actually wants this thing. It's so frustrating, to throw away all that work.
Yeah, it's definitely a common trap, but the lean startup offers a really helpful framework for avoiding that. The build, measure, learn feedback loop is really central to this methodology.
Okay, so break down that feedback loop for me. How does build, measure, learn actually work?
So it's about turning ideas into products. That's a build phase. Then you measure customer response to that product, which is the measure phase. And then based on that response, you learn whether to pivot or persevere. That's the learn phase. So it's more like driving a car than launching a rocket. You're constantly making these small adjustments based on what's in front of you.
So instead of like that old school rigid business plan, you're taking a much more flexible experimental approach.
Exactly. And every startup operates on certain fundamental assumptions. Reavers calls them leap of faith assumptions. And these assumptions need to be rigorously tested.
Okay, leap of faith assumptions. Can you give me an example? What kind of assumptions are we talking about here?
Sure, so think about assumptions about customer needs, product value, or growth mechanisms. Assuming that there's a big market for your product, or that your pricing is attractive, or that people will recommend it to their friends.
So basically, all the things that you believe to be true about your business, but you haven't actually proven yet.
Exactly. That's what the lean startup is all about, testing those assumptions and not just blindly accepting them. Like how Facebook was initially criticized for having no business model, but they proved their growth hypothesis through really rapid user adoption. They weren't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, they didn't let that lack of immediate revenue stop them from validating their core assumptions about growth. Which brings us to another key principle, the MVP. You know, it's so tempting to want to build the perfect product before launching it out into the world.
Right. But the lean startup flips that idea on its head. The goal of an MVP or minimum viable product is not about building this low quality product. It's about testing your assumptions with the least amount of effort possible.
Oh, okay. So it's all about like getting something out there quickly and then starting to gather that crucial feedback. So tell me about some companies that nailed the MVP.
Oh, there's some great examples. Like take Zappos, the online shoe retailer. Their
Yeah.
founder, he just wanted to test if people would actually buy shoes online. So he took pictures of shoes in local stores, posted them online, and if someone bought a pair, he would literally buy it from the store and ship it to them.
Really? He didn't even have like a website or anything. That's such a scrappy approach.
Yeah, it is. It's a classic example of what's called a concierge MVP, and it clearly worked. And there are other types of MVPs too, like the Wizard of Oz MVP, where you're manually fulfilling orders to test demand before building any complex technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you have any other examples of companies that really nailed it with their MVPs? I love these stories.
Well, how about Food on the Table, a meal planning service? They also used a concierge MVP. Instead of building an app or website, they would visit customers' homes, learn about their needs, and then create these personalized meal plans.
So they proved the value of the service first, before investing all that time and money into building all that tech. It's amazing how these companies achieve massive scale by starting with such humble beginnings.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the lean startup. It's about being scrappy, resourceful, and putting the customer first.
Okay, so we've talked about validated learning, the build, measure, learn loop, and the power of the MVP. But how do you actually measure progress in this world of constant experimentation? Like traditional business metrics, like revenue and profit. Those might not be relevant in these really early stages.
You're right, and that's where innovation accounting comes in. It focuses on actionable metrics and learning milestones rather than
It's
just vanity metrics.
okay. Innovation accounting. I like the sound of that.
And
Tell us more about how this works.
sure. Let's look at Grocket, an online education platform. They started by tracking, vanity metrics like the number of customers they had and the number of questions answered, but it wasn't really giving them those insights that they needed.
So what did they do? How did they shift from those vanity metrics to ones that were actually helpful?
Well, they focused on metrics that were directly tied to their learning milestones. For example, they looked at how changes they made to the product impacted user engagement and retention, and also their learning outcomes.
So they were basically using data to constantly test and improve their hypotheses about, how to create a more effective learning experience.
Exactly. And this shift led to some really significant improvements in both their product and their growth.
Okay, so far we've covered validated learning, the build, measure, learn loop, the power of the MVP, and the need for this innovation accounting. But the big question for any entrepreneur is knowing when to pivot and when to persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. And the lean startup offers a framework for making that decision based on validated learning.
Okay, so help us understand that decision-making process. How do you know when to stick with an idea and when it's time to try something new?
Well, let's look at David Benetti's startup at 2Gov. They went through multiple pivots before finding success. They started with a vision, tested it really rigorously, and they weren't afraid to change direction based on the data.
So tell me more about at 2Gov's journey. What were their initial assumptions, and how did they use that validated learning to guide those pivots?
So they initially wanted to build a social network for political engagement, sort of a Facebook for activists, if you will. But after building an MVP and measuring customer response, they realized that those assumptions were off.
So they had to make that tough choice,
Hmm.
double down or try something completely different.
Exactly. And they chose to pivot, focusing on a more targeted product, connecting voters with their elected officials.
Wow, it's amazing how a willingness to pivot can sometimes lead to breakthroughs you would have never expected.
Absolutely. And it's not always about changing your product. Sometimes it's about changing your business model, your target market, or even just your understanding of the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that brings to mind all the different ways that companies can achieve sustainable growth.
Yeah.
There's not really a one-size-fits-all approach, is there?
No, there isn't. And Rees talks about these different engines of growth that startups can use. He categorizes them as sticky, viral, and paid.
Okay, I like it. Let's break those down.
Yeah.
Starting with sticky growth. What's that all about?
So sticky growth is all about attracting and retaining customers over the long term. It's about creating a product or service that people love to use and keep coming back to again and again.
So it's about, building that loyalty and creating those habits like subscription services, online communities, or products that have, really high user engagement.
Exactly. The goal here is to minimize churn, which is the rate at which your customers are leaving, and then, to maximize the lifetime value of each customer. Rees actually gives a couple of examples of companies that really illustrate this, one that sells collectibles, and then another, which is a software company that provides these customer relationship management tools.
So they're both focused on building products that people will use on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Creating that stickiness. But as we talked about earlier, you have to look beyond just those vanity metrics, like just the total number of customers you have. You really need to understand what's driving that growth.
Right. And that's why it's key to track metrics like retention rates, engagement levels, and customer lifetime value.
All right, let's move on to viral growth. This is all about word of mouth and the exponential growth, right?
Yes. Products with viral growth spread through this person-to-person transmission. So think social networks, messaging apps, online games. Products where sharing and inviting friends is really built into the core experience.
So it's not just like people recommending the product. It's the product itself spreading naturally through those networks.
Exactly. The customers aren't even trying to be these evangelists for your product. It's just using the product leads to more users. Like think about Hotmail back in the day. They had this really simple tactic of adding PS, get your free email at Hotmail to every email that was sent.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That little tweak had Like a huge impact.
Yeah.
But how do you actually measure the effectiveness of this kind of growth?
So for viral growth, we look at what's called the viral coefficient. And this basically measures how many new customers each existing customer brings in.
Okay, so like if the viral coefficient is 2, that means each new customer brings in 2 more customers on average, and then those 2 can bring in even more, creating the exponential growth curve.
Precisely. It's all about optimizing for that rapid organic growth. And, it can be kind of challenging to test the value hypothesis for these products because you need to find ways to monetize them without hindering that viral loop.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's tackle the last one. Paid growth. This is probably the most familiar for most businesses, right?
Sure.
It's all about advertising and marketing to acquire new customers.
You got it. Paid growth involves spending money to acquire customers, whether it's through online advertising, traditional media, or even an outbound sales force.
Yeah, and the key is making sure that the cost of acquiring a customer is less than the revenue that they're going to generate, over their lifetime.
Exactly, that's what makes it sustainable. So if you
Yeah.
spend $5 to acquire a customer and they spend $100 over the next year, then you've got a profitable engine.
And the larger that margin, the faster you can grow.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how each engine has its own like dynamics and challenges. So does Rees say that you should only focus on one engine at a time?
That's right. He emphasizes that successful startups will typically pick one engine and really become masters of that growth strategy. Trying to do all three at once can be confusing and really dilute your efforts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, all this talk about growth makes me wonder, how do you know when you've found that product market fit that everyone talks about?
Well, Mark Andreessen, he describes it as being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market.
Yeah.
But as Reese points out, if you're actually asking whether or not you have it, you probably don't.
Oh, okay. So it's that unmistakable feeling of being on a rocket ship. Demand is exceeding supply,
Yeah.
and growth is happening organically.
You got it. And Rees actually connects this concept back to the different engines of growth. He argues that each engine has unique metrics that can help you gauge whether or not you're on the verge of achieving that fit.
Okay, so like if a company has a viral coefficient of, let's say, zero point 0.9 or more,
Mm.
then that might suggest they're close to achieving like that rapid viral growth.
Exactly. And you can use these metrics in conjunction with your innovation accounting to help guide your product development and to prioritize your efforts. It's a really powerful combination.
It's starting to feel like the lean startup is like this roadmap for navigating the uncertain world of startups.
Yeah, that's exactly what it aims to do. But it doesn't end with just product market fit and a successful growth engine.
Right, because even the most successful companies need to be able to, sustain that growth over the long term.
Exactly. Every engine eventually runs out of gas. You need
Yeah.
to innovate and adapt if you want to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not just this one-time event. It's this ongoing process of learning, adapting, and evolving,
Hmm.
which brings us to this concept of the adaptive organization,
Hmm.
building a company culture and structure
Hmm.
that can really handle the constant change of a startup environment.
Right.
All right, so let's dive into the adaptive organization. What makes a company truly adaptable?
Well, one key principle is working in small batches. Just like in lean manufacturing, you want to break down your work into smaller, more manageable chunks instead of these large monolithic projects. And this allows you to get feedback faster and adapt to those changes more easily.
Yeah, it's like applying that agile methodology to the entire company, not just software development.
Exactly. And it's not just about changing how you work, it's also about changing how you think.
Yeah, I'm all about mindset shifts. So
Okay.
how does the lean startup promote a more actable way of thinking?
Well, one really powerful tool is the 5 whys analysis.
Yeah.
This is borrowed from the Toyota production system, and it's basically a way to get to the root cause of a problem and to prevent it from recurring.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down the 5 whys for me. How does it work in practice?
It's really simple, but it's surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
You basically just ask why 5 times in a row.
Wow.
To dig deeper than just the surface symptoms of the problem.
Oh, okay. So instead of just fixing that immediate issue, you keep asking why to uncover the underlying cause.
Yes. And you often find that the root cause is something totally different than what you initially thought.
So it's a great way to avoid those Band-Aid solutions
Yeah.
and to actually address the root cause of the issues.
Exactly. It's about being curious, seeking to understand, and constantly improving your processes.
And this way of thinking, this isn't just for startups, right? I mean, any organization that wants to be more agile and resilient can benefit from this.
Absolutely. The principles of the lean startup are really universal. They can be applied to any situation where there's, uncertainty and you're creating something new.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far. We've covered so much ground, from validated learning, the build, measure, learn loop, to the power of the MVP, the need for innovation accounting, and now this concept of the adaptive organization.
Yeah, it's been a great journey.
It really has. And I'm feeling energized to embrace this more uh, experimental, customer-centric approach to building businesses.
I'm glad to hear that. And what's so exciting about the lean startup is that it's more than just a methodology. It's really a mindset. It's a philosophy that helps us face uncertainty and to learn from our mistakes and to constantly evolve. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Well, that's right. Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into the world of the lean startup.
Welcome back. One of the things that really struck me about this book is how it challenges so much of the traditional thinking around product development.
Okay, I'm ready to challenge some assumptions.
Yeah.
What are some of those outdated ideas that the lean startup really disrupts?
Well, the old school model of product development is all about big upfront planning, tons of detailed specifications, and these long development cycles. It's like launching a rocket. Everything has to be absolutely perfect before you take off.
And as we've seen, that approach just doesn't really cut it in the fast-paced world of startups. Things are constantly changing.
Exactly. The lean startup is all about being iterative, being experimental. Instead of trying to predict the future, you build something small, you get it out there, you learn from it, and then you adapt based on what you discover.
That makes me think about this concept of waste that Rees discusses. In lean manufacturing, waste is anything that doesn't add value for the customer.
Yeah.
So how does that translate to the world of startups?
That's a great question, and it's something that a lot of startups really, really struggle with. Waste can show up in so many different forms, like building features that nobody wants,
Hmm.
spending months perfecting a product that doesn't actually solve a real problem, or even targeting the wrong customer.
Yeah. So it's not just about wasted time and money, but also like wasted effort and missed opportunities.
Exactly. And one of the biggest sources of waste that I see in startups is this fear of releasing a product that's not perfect.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling all too well. That desire to like hold back until everything's just right
Right.
before sharing it with the world.
Right. It's a natural instinct, but it can be so counterproductive. Rees argues that the longer you wait to release a product, the more chances you're missing out on to gather that valuable feedback and to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. So it's like you're saying, get it out there, see what happens, and then make it better. That early feedback is just so valuable when it comes to making sure that you're on the right track.
Exactly. The lean startup is all about getting out of the building, talking to real customers, and learning as quickly as possible.
That makes me think of the story about IMVU, the company that Rees co-founded. They spent like months building this product based on all their assumptions, only to find out later that they were totally wrong.
Yeah, it's a classic cautionary tale. They had this really amazing idea for an instant messaging add-on that would let people use 3D avatars to chat with their friends, and they were convinced that it was going to be a smash hit.
But it turned out that people didn't want to use avatars with their existing friends. They wanted to use them to meet new people.
You got it. And they only uncovered that insight by actually talking to customers
Yeah.
and observing how people were using the product.
So they had to make a big pivot, ditching their original idea and then building this standalone IM network based on what they learned from their users.
Right. It was a really tough process because they had to scrap a lot of work. But it was the right move because it ultimately led them to a much more successful product.
It's a great reminder that even the most brilliant ideas need to be tested and validated in the real world.
And that's where the MVP comes in, building that smallest, simplest version of your product to test those key assumptions. We talked about Zappos and food on the table, but there are so many other inspiring examples of companies that used MVPs to validate their ideas.
Give me another example. I'm loving these stories.
All right, so how about Dropbox? They were tackling a problem that many people didn't even know they had. Seamlessly syncing files across multiple devices.
So how did they use an MVP to test whether people even wanted this?
Well, they actually created a video demonstrating the product before they even had a working version. The video showed how easy it was to share files and keep them synced between computers using Dropbox.
Oh, wow. So a video MVP.
Yeah.
That's so clever. Like a great way to gauge customer interest without having to invest all that time and money into, heavy development.
Exactly. And you know what? The video went viral. It generated a ton of buzz and signups for their waiting list. So it was clear that they had struck a chord and that people were really craving this solution.
It's incredible how such a simple MVP can be so powerful.
Mm.
Not only can it validate the concept, but it can also generate a ton of excitement.
Absolutely. But remember, it's not just about validating your product, it's also about validating your growth hypothesis. As Rees points out, every startup needs a clear engine of growth to really fuel its expansion.
Right. And we talked about those different engines of growth, sticky, viral, and paid. But it sounds like they would each require different types of MVPs, wouldn't they?
You nailed it. So for example, if you're building a product that relies on viral growth, then your MVP needs to be designed for easy sharing and inviting friends.
Okay, so for like a social network, the MVP might prioritize features that make it super simple to invite friends and share content.
Exactly. Whereas an MVP for a product that relies on paid growth might focus more on, converting those free users into paying customers.
So it's all about aligning your MVP with that engine of growth that you've chosen for your startup.
Right. Which brings us back to the importance of innovation accounting.
Hmm.
You need to track the right metrics to know if your chosen engine of growth is actually working.
That reminds me of the example that Rees uses to illustrate the viral engine of growth.
Hmm.
The company that created this social network for photo sharing.
Yeah, the one that was initially focused on those vanity metrics like total users and photos uploaded, but those metrics weren't really giving them a clear picture of whether their viral loop was actually working.
So they switched their focus to the viral coefficient, which
No.
gave them a much more accurate measure of how quickly their product was spreading.
Exactly. By tracking that specific metric, they could actually pinpoint areas for improvement and optimize their product for viral growth.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of choosing the right metrics, especially in those early startup days. But how do you avoid, falling into that trap of vanity metrics? How do you know which metrics are going to give you those real insights?
Well, Rees recommends using what he calls the 3 A's of metrics:
Hmm.
actionable, accessible, and auditable.
Okay, so break down those 3 A's for me, starting with actionable. What does that mean?
So an actionable metric clearly shows cause and effect. So it tells you exactly what actions you need to take to actually improve that metric.
So instead of just tracking, like website visits, you might track how many visitors sign up for your email list
Yeah.
or make a purchase, because those are actions that you can directly influence.
Exactly. How about accessible? What do you think that means?
Well, I would guess that an accessible metric is one that everyone in the company can easily understand and track. It's not buried in some complicated spreadsheet that only data scientists can figure out.
That's it. It's all about transparency and giving everyone in the company the power to make data-driven decisions. And then finally, auditable means that the data is reliable and trustworthy. You have to be able to verify that the data is accurate and that it's being collected consistently.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if people don't trust the data, then they're not going to use it to guide their decisions.
Exactly. And this is super important in a startup where there's a lot of experimentation and unknowns. You need to be confident in the data that you're using to make those big decisions.
So we've talked about choosing the right metrics, but what about actually using those metrics to make those decisions? It can be really tough to know when to pivot and when to persevere.
Yeah, you're right. That's one of the hardest calls for any entrepreneur to make. And Rees stresses that the decision to pivot should never be based on gut feeling or emotion. It needs to be based on validated learning.
So you need solid evidence that your current strategy just isn't working, and that a pivot has a good chance of leading to better results.
Precisely. And that evidence should come from your key metrics, what your customers are telling you, and your overall understanding of the market.
That reminds me of Wealthfront, the company that started as a social gaming platform and then pivoted to become this leader in automated investment advice. What a transformation.
Yeah, it's a great example of a company that made this really big change based on what they learned from their customers.
So tell me about Wealthfront's journey. What were they initially thinking, and how did validated learning help them navigate that pivot?
So they started with this idea of a fantasy stock market game where people could compete and win prizes. They built their MVP, they launched it, and they quickly built a large user base. Seems like a pretty good start, right?
Yeah, it does. So what led them to pivot?
Well, they started talking to their customers, and they discovered that many of them were actually using the game to learn about investing and to try out different strategies.
So they were essentially using the game as a financial education tool.
Exactly. And Wealthfront saw an opportunity to create a product that met that need head on.
So sometimes your customers can reveal a hidden opportunity that you never even considered.
Absolutely. And their pivot was a huge success. They leveraged their existing technology and user base to create a new product that really, really took off in the market.
It's a great story. It's a good reminder that pivoting isn't about giving up. It's about evolving and adapting to those new possibilities.
Exactly. And Rees actually provides this whole catalog of different types of pivots that startups can make.
Okay, now I'm curious. What are some of the different pivot flavors?
Well, there's the zoom in pivot, where you take a feature that was part of your original product and make it the entire product.
Oh, so you're basically taking a side dish and making it the main course.
You got it. And then there's the zoom out pivot, where you do the opposite. You take
Yeah.
your original product and make it just one feature of a larger platform.
Interesting. What other kinds of pivots are there?
There's the customer segment pivot. This is when you realize you're targeting the wrong customer group and you switch to a different segment.
Yeah, I've seen this happen a lot with startups that start by targeting consumers, but then they realize that their product's actually a better fit for businesses.
Exactly. And then there's the customer need pivot. This is when you discover that your original solution isn't actually addressing your target customer's needs. So you have to come up with a new solution.
So it's all about being open to changing your understanding of the problem you're trying to solve.
That's it. And then there's the platform pivot, where you go from a single product to a platform that lets other developers build on top of your technology.
Yeah, this is huge in the tech world. Think about companies like Apple, Google, and Amazon. They all have these thriving developer ecosystems.
Exactly. And those platforms can create these really powerful network effects and unlock these whole new avenues for growth.
It's amazing how the lean startup provides this way to think about all these different types of pivots.
Yeah, it's an invaluable tool for navigating that uncertainty of the startup world.
We've talked a lot about pivoting, but what about persevering? How do you know when your idea is worth sticking with, even when things get really tough?
That's a tough one, and there's no easy answer. But Rees stresses that persevering should always be based on evidence, not just blind faith.
Okay, so you need to have data that shows that your core assumptions are holding true, and that you're making progress toward your goals.
Exactly. The progress might be slow and steady, but it has to be there.
This makes me think of Airbnb, the online marketplace for lodging. They went through years of slow growth,
Yeah.
and they were actually close to failing several times
Yeah.
before ultimately becoming wildly successful.
Yeah, they're a classic example of a company that pushed through that adversity and ultimately achieved amazing things.
So tell me about their journey. What were some of those early challenges that they faced, and how did they manage to overcome them?
Well, they started by renting out air mattresses on their apartment floors during a design conference in San Francisco. It was a super scrappy idea, and it took a while for them to really find their footing.
Talk about a bare bones MVP.
Right, and they faced a lot of skepticism and rejection early on. Investors didn't really understand their vision, and they struggled to get people to use their service.
But they kept iterating, they kept experimenting
Yeah.
and learning from their mistakes.
Exactly. And they pivoted along the way too. They expanded beyond air mattresses to include entire homes and apartments. They made their website easier to use, and they really focused on building trust and safety within their community.
It's incredible how they turned that quirky idea into this global hospitality giant. It's like the little engine that could, but for the startup world.
It really is. It speaks volumes about their perseverance, their ability to adapt, and their unwavering belief in their vision.
So perseverance is essential, but it has to be, grounded in reality. You need to have that evidence that you're on the right path and that your hard work is actually getting you closer to your goals.
Absolutely. And sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to let go of an idea that's just not working.
It's about finding that balance between sticking with it
Yeah.
and knowing when to cut your losses.
Exactly. And that's where the principles of the lean startup can be so helpful. They give you that framework for making those difficult decisions based on real data and validated learning, not just your gut feeling or your ego.
It's all about being honest with yourself about what's working and what isn't.
Yeah.
And then having the courage to make those necessary changes.
You got it. Which leads us back to building an adaptive organization. You need a company culture that embraces experimentation. That's okay with failure, and that celebrates what you learn along the way.
So it's not just about changing your processes, it's about changing the entire mindset of your company.
Absolutely. The lean startup is as much about culture as it is about methodology.
All right, so let's talk about building that adaptive culture. What are the key ingredients?
Well, one of the most important is empowering your team to make decisions and to take ownership of their work.
So moving away from that top-down, do as I say approach to something more collaborative and decentralized.
Exactly. You want to create an environment where people feel safe to take risks and to know that it's okay to make mistakes as long as they learn from them.
Yeah. That makes me think of blameless postmortems. Rees talks about analyzing failures in a way that focuses on learning
Yeah.
and not pointing fingers.
That's right. The goal is to understand what went wrong, to figure out why it happened,
Right.
and to make changes to prevent it from happening again.
So it's about building this culture of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Everyone learning and growing together.
Exactly. And that culture needs to be supported by the right tools and processes too.
Yeah. We talked about working in small batches earlier. What are some other practices that can help create a truly adaptive organization?
So one that Rees highlights is continuous deployment. This is a software development practice where code changes are released to production really often and automatically.
So instead of like those big infrequent releases, you're constantly pushing out these small incremental updates.
Exactly. This way you get feedback faster and you can more easily adapt to those changing customer needs.
So it's like applying that MVP principle to the entire software development process.
You got it. And Rees believes that the principles of continuous deployment can be used beyond just software development too.
Oh, that's interesting. How could continuous deployment work outside of software?
Well, imagine a marketing team that's constantly testing and refining their messaging, or a sales team that's always experimenting with new ways to close deals.
So it's all about that experimental mindset. Always trying to find ways to get better.
Yeah, that's the essence of an adaptive organization.
So we've talked about empowering teams, embracing those blameless postmortems, and using practices like continuous deployment. What else can leaders do to really build this more adaptable culture?
Well, one of the most important things is to lead by example. If you want your team to embrace experimenting and learning, you need to do it yourself.
So it's about walking the walk. Being willing to take risks,
Yeah.
to admit when you're wrong, and to learn from those mistakes.
You got it. And celebrating those who do the same.
It's about creating this company culture where failure isn't something to be afraid of,
Yeah.
but an opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely. It's about constantly challenging the way things are done and looking for ways to improve.
That makes me think about IGN Entertainment.
Yeah.
The media company that used the five whys analysis to really transform their culture and to make their operations much more efficient.
Yeah. It's a great example of how the lean startup can work, even in a large, well-established organization.
So tell me about their transformation. What were some of the challenges that they were facing, and how did they use the five whys to address them?
Well, they were struggling with operational inefficiencies and communication breakdowns. They were
Right.
causing, delays and errors. They'd tried to fix these issues before, but nothing seemed to work.
Sounds like they were stuck in a rut.
Exactly. And they realized that they needed a culture change. They needed a culture where people felt empowered to spot problems, to analyze them, and to come up with solutions.
So they needed everyone on board
Yeah.
and involved in the process, and the five whys analysis helped them achieve that.
It did. They started using the five whys to analyze every problem, no matter how small, and they made it clear that the goal wasn't to play the blame game, but to really understand that root cause of the problem and to prevent it from happening again.
So they built this culture of accountability
Yeah.
and continuous improvement.
Exactly. And they empowered everyone in the organization to participate in making things better.
What a powerful story. It shows how something as simple as the five whys can have such a huge impact on a company's culture.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not just about tools and processes. It's about that fundamental shift in mindset. Embracing experimentation, being open to learning, and
Yeah.
constantly seeking improvement.
That's really the heart of the lean startup, isn't it? Challenging the status quo,
Yeah.
being open to new ideas, and always striving to improve.
That's it. And it's
You-
about creating a company culture that supports those behaviors.
It sounds like the lean startup is more than just, a set of techniques. It's almost a philosophy,
Yeah.
like a way of life.
You got it. And it's a philosophy that's relevant for any organization that wants to thrive in this fast-paced world where change is the only constant.
It's about being adaptable, being agile, and putting your customers at the center of everything you do.
Exactly. And it's about embracing the journey. Knowing that there will be bumps along the way, but
Mhm.
but those bumps are just opportunities to learn and grow.
This exploration of the lean startup has been incredible so far. We've learned about validated learning, building MVPs, understanding innovation accounting, and the importance of creating that adaptive organization.
Yeah, it's been quite a deep dive.
It really has, and I'm so inspired to bring this experimental, data-driven approach to the way I work.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that. And remember, the lean startup is more than just a methodology. It's a mindset. It's a philosophy that empowers us to navigate that uncertainty, to embrace change, and to constantly evolve. But there's even more to discover.
That's right. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive into the lean startup. We'll be exploring how these principles can be applied beyond the world of traditional businesses.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the lean startup. I'm really excited to explore how these principles can be applied beyond the world of traditional businesses. Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how the lean startup is making waves in so many different sectors. It's not just about building the next big tech company. It's about making a real difference in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And one area where we're seeing a lot of exciting things happening is in the social impact space.
Hmm.
Nonprofits, government agencies, even social entrepreneurs are using these principles to create really effective and lasting solutions to social problems.
Absolutely. It's about using innovation and entrepreneurial thinking to create positive change. One inspiring example that comes to mind is the Village Laundry Service, a social enterprise in India. They're using a lean startup approach to provide affordable laundry services to low-income communities.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about the Village Laundry Service. What were their initial assumptions, and how did they use the lean startup to kind of prove their model?
So they started with this belief that people in these communities would be willing to pay for a convenient and an affordable laundry service.
Yeah.
But instead of, investing in a bunch of expensive equipment and facilities right away, they decided to test their hypothesis with a simple MVP.
So what did their MVP look like? Did they set up a small shop somewhere?
Well, they took a much more unconventional approach. They literally started with a washing machine mounted on the back of a truck, and they would drive it to different neighborhoods, offer their service, and see how people responded.
Wow, talk about a scrappy MVP.
Uh,
That's so resourceful.
right. It's a perfect example of starting small and testing your assumptions in the real world. And through this process of experimentation and customer feedback, they were able to refine their offering and develop a business model that was both sustainable and impactful.
It's amazing how they use such a creative, low-cost approach to solve this real problem.
Exactly. And it shows that the lean startup can be used to develop innovative solutions in all kinds of contexts. We're also seeing government agencies start to embrace these principles, to become more efficient and citizen-centric.
That makes me think about the example that Rees gives in the book about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB. They were created after the 2008 financial crisis to protect consumers from financial abuse. That's a huge challenge.
It was a massive undertaking, but instead of, building this huge bureaucracy and creating a bunch of complicated regulations, they took a lean startup approach.
So how did they actually apply these principles to such a complex problem?
Well, they started by identifying their key assumptions. For example, they assumed that consumers would be willing to report financial abuse, that they would trust a government agency to handle their complaints, and that the agency would be able to effectively investigate and resolve those complaints.
So they had a lot of unknowns that they needed to test. So how did they go about validating those assumptions?
Well, they decided to start with a really basic MVP, just a hotline number that people could call to report financial abuse. They knew that they needed to gather that data and feedback before building out a more complex infrastructure.
Yeah, it's like they were saying, let's start by just listening to what people are experiencing.
Exactly. It was a low-cost, low-risk way to gather data and learn by tracking the calls that they were receiving, the types of complaints that people were making, and the outcomes of their investigations. They were able to adapt and improve their approach very quickly.
It's a great example of how the lean startup can be used to create government agencies that are more agile and responsive to people's needs.
It really is. It shows that these principles can be applied to make a real difference in how we govern ourselves.
This has been such an eye-opening exploration of the lean startup. It seems like these principles have the potential to not only transform the business world, but also the social sector and even the way we govern ourselves.
I completely agree. It's about adopting a new way of thinking and working that's based on experimentation, learning, and continuous improvement.
It's about empowering everyone to create a better future, one experiment at a time.
That's a great way to put it. And it's been a pleasure diving into these concepts with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. It's been a fantastic journey, and I hope our listeners are leaving with a sense of inspiration and a toolkit of practical ideas that they can use to build their own ventures, to tackle tough challenges,
Yeah.
and to make a positive impact in the world.
I hope so too. And remember, it's all about being curious,
Hmm.
being bold,
Yeah.
and being willing to learn and adapt along the way.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the lean startup. We'll catch you next time on the deep dive.